Hey friends, welcome to a new video about the magical world of Harry Potter. And oh, how I wish the tone were different. But once again we have to talk about this in a negative light. Negative because Warner is once again showing that it doesn't see the products, the franchises it holds the audiovisual exploitation rights to as narrative elements, but rather as mere merchandise. As something born in corporate offices rather than from a screenwriter's keyboard or a director's vision. Something that, on the other hand, I don't think is even being handled well from this commercial perspective, which I will elaborate on later, because separating one thing from the other is completely absurd. I already made a video at the time explaining that there were many stories that could be told within the wizarding world, building on existing foundations, and I think it's a huge conceptual mistake to create a series that reboots the film saga and ties you down for 10 years. I'll elaborate on all of this, but if the very premise weren't already concerning, it seems like the way they're gonna execute it won't be much better. It is not just a conceptual mistake anymore, it also looks like it's gonna be execution 1. This series was introduced with the premise of being a product more faithful to the original material, meaning the 7 books that make up the main Harry Potter story. All of this based on the understanding that a significant part of the original material was ignored in the films, and some subplots, while maybe not incomplete, were certainly underdeveloped, something I completely agree with. I'm especially talking about the Goblet of Fire and the Half-Blood Prince, the books from which the most material was discarded. Essentially everything surrounding Voldemort suffered the most. But to fix this, all that was needed was a dedicated project focusing on him, properly explaining his family's story, how his mother Minerva used a love potion on his Muggle father to conceive him, and how his father abandoned both her and their child once the potion effects wore off. A story that explains why he became the way he did. That would have certainly been a much more exciting project, one where they could also explore the murders he committed to create the Horcrux, or how he cursed the defense against the Dark Arts teaching position after Dumbledore refused to give it to him. Seeing all of that about Voldemort on screen would be amazing, but there was absolutely no need to reboot the entire saga to make it happen. Other parts that the movies left out, like Dumbledore's story, were already explored with varying degrees of success in Fantastic Beasts. And while that saga didn't work and had major canon errors, conceptually it was a much better idea. That's the direction they should have taken, with projects like the Voldemort one I mentioned, a series about the founders of Hogwarts, or my personal favorite, the Marauders. That last one is an idea that I developed in that previous video because it has an excellent foundation, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships and key events. Then there are smaller reasons that some might use to justify this reboot, like including characters that never appear on the big screen. Characters like Peeves or Winky, for example. It would be nice to see them, yeah, but they're hardly a real justification for rebooting the entire saga, especially when we can already enjoy them in video games. Given that they are minor characters, I think that's more than enough. Some might also argue that, from a technical standpoint, the movies, notably after David Yates took over as director, were far from brilliant, but they're still delivered on the most important aspects, such as bringing the wizarding world to life. The production design of this franchise is undeniably outstanding, and the films managed to capture the heart and soul of the story conveyed in the books. Despite their many visible flaws, the films are a product that absolutely holds up, and the fact that this series is being released just 15 years after they concluded feels almost offensive. It is as if they're saying the original films were done poorly and now they're going to do it right. Justifying this series as a way to attract new audiences would also be completely misguided. Anything related to this world already captures public interest on its own. I'm talking about books and movies, of course, but also exhibitions, theme parks, merchandise, and video games. Harry Potter is embedded in the collective imagination, and is going to stay there. If a product is good, people will end up consuming it, whether they're long-time fans or newcomers, simply because a massive wave of praise will generate curiosity and draw them in. If Fantastic Beasts has been good, it would have dominated the box office. The reason it didn't live up to expectations was simply that it wasn't good enough. This isn't a franchise that needs to attract new audiences, not at all. It's a franchise that just needs to make a strong comeback with high quality projects, and that's it. It already has the world's attention. Whatever new audience might gain is minimal, so that shouldn't be the driving force behind its project. All of this applies to the concept behind the series, but when it comes to execution, which is what we are here to talk about, we know very little, and the little we do know has already raised doubts. For starters, when the project was announced, they used the same typography, music and design as the films. Now, this could simply be because there wasn't anything developed yet, just an agreement to make the series on Max and nothing more. But this raises a big question. Should the series continue the stylistic choices of a saga that is trying to reboot and therefore replace, or should it establish its own identity? I believe the second option would be the right approach for what they are aiming to do, even though I've already made it clear that I do not agree with their goal in the first place. Keeping the same styles would only make sense for new projects that are meant to exist within the wall of the original films, not for something that is supposed to stand apart as a fresh take. And oh friends, if you decide to change things up, what a challenge you have ahead, because improving the music, costumes, sets and locations of this saga seems like an impossible task. Comparisons will be inevitable, and I don't think the series will come out on top. By the way, Harry Potter is probably the franchise with the most props, costumes and sets preserved in one single place, the same place where this series will be filmed, Warner Bros. Studios in Lithgow, London. I can't even imagine how tempting it must be to simply walk over to the next storage room and reuse the existing materials instead of creating everything from scratch, considering the enormous cost in both time and money. Moving on to the casting, as you probably already know, 3 actors have been confirmed so far, those playing Minerva McGonagall, Albus Dumbledore and yes, Severus Snape. Regarding Minerva, personally, and I think I can extend this opinion to much of the fandom, the choice of McTeer seems like a fantastic decision. Not only is she British, but she also has the right physical presence. In fact, she bears a strong resemblance to the late Maggie Smith, though Janet is about 8 inches taller, but that actually works in her favor. McGonagall is described as tall and thin, maybe not that tall, but still. She was a standout chaser on the Gryffindor Quidditch team in her youth, until an injury ended her playing days, so having this physical trait could add to the character. Although, to be fair, that's a minor detail. What truly matters is how she embodies McGonagall's commanding presence. A strict, poised and imposing professor, the kind who can silence an entire classroom just by walking through the door. Although in the books, when Harry first arrives at Hogwarts, McGonagall is 56 years old and this actress is currently 63. I think it's perfectly plausible for her to pass for a younger age. Plus, it's not essential for the character to be that precise in this regard. Just look at Maggie Smith herself, who was 65 when she filmed the first movie. Of the 3 casting choices we're discussing today, this is clearly the best one. As for Dumbledore, I have mixed feelings about the choice of John Lithgow. Physically, considering that makeup and hairstyling will play a major role in the character's look, he doesn't feel out of place at all. He's particularly tall, just like Dumbledore, and at 6'4", he will, much like McGonagall, have an imposing presence, which is certainly a shared trait between them. I wouldn't say he has blue eyes, but they are light-colored, and if he needs a hook nose, prosthetics will take care of that. I've seen this actor in a couple of shows and a huge fan of his role as Trinity in Dexter and as Barney's father in How I Met Your Mother. Now, there are 2 key points about this casting. The first is that this actor is not British, he's American. So if your promise was to be more faithful to the books than the films were, then this already feels a bit off. I don't think it's a bad choice though, because he played Churchill in The Crown, where he obviously had to adopt a British accent and gave an standout performance. But I insist, if your premise is to be more in line with the books, this decision feels odd, that's undeniable. And the second point, which I honestly think is a bit of a suicide move, is the actor's age. John Lithgow is already 79 years old, and as he himself stated in an interview, this will be his last major role, and we'll see if he even finishes it, because the series will likely wrap up around 2035, by which point he will be 89. Even though the character dies in the 6th season, he should still have a cameo in the 7th. Many people live to that age, but it's not the norm. It's a pretty optimistic projection, and not just because of whether he lives or not, but also because of whether he will still be physically capable of performing the role. I'm talking about whether he'll avoid becoming hungover, breaking a hip, needing to be hospitalized for infections, undergoing heart surgery, developing dementia, and all the other things that tend to happen to people who are over 80. In this case, it would have been much more logical to cast an actor in his 60s, well made up to look older and call it a day. Yes, we lost a Dumbledore early on in the saga, but he was 72, which is much less likely to bring about those issues. though it ultimately did. It wasn't a casting mistake, just bad luck, but here it does feel like a pretty careless decision. I find it hard to see how this will go smoothly. I mean, I like this actor and I'm sure he will do a great job for as long as he can, but this is definitely going to cause complications during filming, even in the best case scenario. I would have loved to see Gary Oldman in this role, honestly. He's an actor I'm a huge fan of, and it would have been a nice nod to the previous saga, considering he already played Severus. He would have been at a much more suitable age, although his biggest disadvantage is his height, as he is only 5'8", which wouldn't have been as compatible with McGonagall, who's so tall. It's not that I wanted to fill the cast with former actors from the previous saga in different roles, but a nod like this would have worked well, not for the sake of the reference itself, but because it would have felt organic. He's an actor who fits the role, and you could just add leaves to his shoes and not have such a tall McGonagall, which would be a shame, because as I have said, that casting is almost perfect. And now let's get to the meat of the matter. Warner, in its well-known self-destructive streak, now in collaboration with Discovery since their merger in 2022, has decided that the best actor to play Severus Snape should be none other than Paapa Essiedu. And well, this has sparked an obvious wave of criticism for one simple reason: he's black and the character isn't. It's clear, of course, that some people will tell you that if you disagree with this decision it's because you're racist and so on, but these are people with the argumentative capacity of an 8-year-old and a very strong ideological bias, so I'm going to completely ignore their opinions and focus on the facts, on why the choice of this actor goes against the narrative of the character in particular and the story in general. First, let's explain where this decision comes from. It doesn't come from the original material, where Snape is described as having pale, almost sickly skin, nor does it come from the script. Over a year ago, there were strong rumors about the possibility of casting a black Albus Dumbledore played by Blair Underwood. While this didn't come to fruition, the rumors seemed pretty reliable and confirmed that, although he wasn't ultimately chosen, he had been considered for the role. This leads me to a rather simple deduction: the higher-ups wanted to cast a black actor in the main ensemble no matter what. Warner is in desperate need of products with good revenue, as there have been rumors about the potential sale of several intellectual properties they hold exploitation rights for, not just for film and TV but also for music, merchandising and theme parks. This new management is determined to put its franchises back in the spotlight, like this one, but also DC and the Lord of the Rings. While they don't have the TV rights to the Lord of the Rings, that's Amazon's territory, they do have the film ones. It's a natural impulse from the leadership of such a company to wanna reach as many audiences as possible, which is what they concluded that representing a greater racial diversity might be a useful tool in doing so. But beyond everything I've explained about how attracting new audiences shouldn't be the core of their strategy, their reasoning is fundamentally flawed. The decision made here actually excludes respecting the narrative of the story. There's a real dilemma between two options. It's not that you can just add a black Snape and say that it won't affect the quality of the product. And these lessons should have already been well learned in Hollywood after the failures of recent years, both by Warner and by other big companies like Disney. Almost every time a decision like this has been made, the product has turned out poorly because it was focused more on external factors than on the actual narrative. And when I say it turned out badly, I'm talking about both quality and revenue, because as I mentioned before, one greatly depends on the other, and it will depend even more on the quality when in this case the product is going to span over 10 years. You need to focus on building a solid product that will keep people hooked after 5 seasons, not just create an initial big impact to attract a certain target audience for one season because there's a black lead, and then by season 5 nobody will be watching anymore. At least that's what I think. Disney, in fact, has already expressed its intention to stop this trend, and the general audience now views these practices very negatively. There's been a clear shift, and now there's much more opposition to wokeism in fiction than support for it. This makes it especially surprising that Warner is diving into this mess with a character who will be portrayed by this actor for 10 years. And before delving into why making this character black goes against the narrative, let's first put the context of what the UK was like in the 90s, the time in which the events of this story take place. In the 90s, only around 2% of the population in the UK was black, just under 4% was Asian, and more than 94% was white. Of course, there can and should be black students at Hogwarts and black wizards, but they are the exception, not the norm. so it's quite striking that one of the main characters is black. Now, and this is where it starts affecting the narrative, we're talking about a specific character who represents the division between two worlds, those who want to make the world a place where both wizards and muggles can coexist, and those who only want to dominate others because they consider themselves somehow superior beings. The message of Harry Potter, that the first group is clearly the good group, is one of integration, cooperation and respect, and this isn't just about races, it's about everything. But the thing is, Snape is, within this universe where there are clearly good and bad characters, the only truly great one. The one who has done genuinely bad things and genuinely good ones. He's the character who, from the first book to the last, is designed to make you perceive him as bad, as untrustworthy. So putting this focus on a black character is going to seem more racist than not including more characters who represent that 2% of black individuals that would be more in line with the reality of the time. And the same goes for when they explain that James Potter and the rest of the Marauders bullied Snape. It's inevitable that this will create the perception that the whole conflict surrounding Snape stems from his skin color. It is just absurd, this decision. Then, by the way, the actor chosen has a second rather obvious problem. He's objectively good looking. Everything Snape is not. Snape has pale, almost sickly skin, a hook nose, and a disabled appearance. When I see the actor, I see the complete opposite. That physical appearance is a big part of why Snape is the way he is and why he was bullied. And now the role will be unintentionally filled by the character's skin color. I'm assuming unintentionally, because if there are direct references to this, well, that's when everything goes off the rails. At that point, the attachment to the book will be completely gone. And this will get even denser and require more careful analysis, but the pure blood families in the wizarding world aren't exactly numerous. And if you trace back their family trees, they tend to converge. We know that Snape's mother was pure blood, but his father was a muggle, which is why he is called the half-blood prince. But here, the pseudonym will have a double meaning that wasn't in the original story. To say something good about this casting choice, at least it fits more with the age of the character in the books, since he's 34 and Snape in the first book is 31, while Alan Rickman was 54 when they filmed Philosopher's Stone. This would make it more consistent for him to be from the same year as Harry's parents. I don't know, I had to say something good, but that said, I'm quite tired of forced inclusion in general, but especially with the Harry Potter universe. This has been going on for a while. I remember when they had to replace the character of Craig, they also chose a black actor even though the character had been white up until that point. There was also the choice of a black Hermione in the theater play, even though in the books it says she came back from the holidays with tan skin, or the need to include a transgender character in Hogwarts Legacy just to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling. Speaking of J.K. Rowling, last week she tweeted saying that the three main actors from the movies have ruined the saga. It makes you wonder if the reason of this reboot might actually be that she wants to distance herself from the previous cast. For those who are new to this, it's because both Daniel, Emma and Rupert have spoken out against the author's views on the whole trans issue. But if you ask me, both sides are wrong and there are two different branches of wokeness. They are like two rats fighting over a churro with Linkin Park music playing in the background. What they need to do is separate the fiction from their absurd ideological rants. It feels like everything around Harry Potter since the movie saga ended, and even a little before, has been heavily politicized. And those of us who are Potterheads, declare fans of this franchise, this saga, this story, and want them to focus on it and leave ideological issues aside, right now we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's all for today. If you enjoyed the video, a like helps a lot.